All right, so hello, my name is Morgan Mitchell. I'm a writing and publishing emphasis, and today I'll be presenting on women in the media, representation in newsrooms, and content. To preface this, just a little more information about myself. The theme of my presentation ties into the theme of the website I made this semester in senior portfolio, and also a passion I have in life, which is fighting for justice for the oppressed. A part of misrepresentation is a part of oppression because it brings negative stereotypes, silencing, and invisibility. Something I'm extremely passionate about is women's rights and the way women are treated in this country. And something I've noticed going into the journalism field is how women are represented, and I noticed that there's a great misrepresentation and both an underrepresentation of women as well. And I decided to explore this further, and this is what I found. So 38% of bylines and other credits in print, internet, TV, and wire news currently go to women. And to break this down further, evening broadcast has the widest gender gap, with only 25% of correspondents and reporters being women, and internet publications have the narrowest gender gap, with 46% of bylines going to women. And then within those web publications, the Daily Beast has the widest gender gap, with 38% of bylines coming from women, and Fox News actually has no gender gap, with 50-50 bylines going to both men and women. Within print, Daily News has the worst gender gap I think I've ever seen, with 24% of bylines going to women. But San Jose Mercury News has the narrowest gender gap, with 44% of bylines going to women. And this information is all from the Women's Media Center. It's also important to note how women of color are even more misrepresented than white women. The American Society of News Editors surveyed 737 news organizations and found that every minority population is underrepresented in the media, and women are even more underrepresented in every ethnic group except for Asians. So why is this underrepresentation of women important? Why is this an issue that we need to address? I decided to look at the New York Times because they do have a wide gender gap, but they're not on the extreme end, so they most likely represent the majority of publications in America. And this is also what I found. The number of women on staff affects who they use as sources. According to an analysis done by Pointer, men are far more utilized as sources than women, and this stems back to the lack of women writers, because although men and women both do overutilize men's sources, men writers do it more than women. Vox reported in 2016, a group of female scholars analyzed the New York Times coverage of the presidential primary for the 2016 election, and looked at every article in the New York Times from March 2015 to January 2016, and found that 80% of the political scientists quoted in these articles were men. And this is not just the New York Times. When we look at broadcasts with primetime cable and Sunday news shows, 75% of national security and foreign affairs commentators have been men, according to a Media Matters for America study. By not having an equal number of men and women's sources, we're silencing women and setting them as a secondary social class to men, because we're saying they don't have expert opinions and their opinions don't matter, or they shouldn't be consulted when something is happening in their own country. This is also apparent in issues that directly affect women and involve women, such as rape and reproductive rights. Bylines and sources are still predominantly men, even in these issues. 91% of reported rape and sexual assault victims are women, and yet in a year-long study done by the Women's Media Center of news coverage of campus rape and sexual assault, found that men reporters were more likely to cover such cases and use more men as sources. They also were more likely to publish quotes about the impact of rape on the alleged perpetrator than on the alleged victim. And when you give more empathy and emphasis to the alleged perpetrator, you're telling the victim that you're invalidating her experience and telling other victims that they shouldn't report out of fear that they might be scrutinized for ruining a man's career if he's in sports, or a man's future if he's in school. And not a single outlet had more than half of its quotes and articles about reproductive issues from women. This means women's voices and perspectives are being left out on a topic that directly affects us. We not only have a problem with underrepresentation, but also a problem with false and harmful representation of women. In 2015, the Women's Media Center found that editorial boards of the 10 largest newspapers in 9 regions of the country were comprised of 7 men, usually white, and 4 women. When you don't have women editing papers and looking over headlines and content, a lot of sexist articles can be published that end up harming women. such as, "Never mind Brexit, who won Legsit?" These are two very important, prominent women, powerful women in this country being reduced to nothing but their legs. "Birth control makes women unattractive and crazy." This was a headline in Breitbart, and I don't really have to explain how this is extremely offensive. This article appeared in USA Today. New mom Dana Vollmer chases history in Rio Olympics. When Michael Phelps had a kid right before his appearance in the Olympics, it wasn't mentioned before his name in a headline. This is because women are predominantly identified in two different groups. Either we're identified as our motherhood, as seen here, or as a wife in our marital status, as seen here with this headline: "Wife of a Bears lineman wins a bronze medal today in Rio Olympics." This appeared in this is from the Chicago Tribune. We don't even know the Olympian's name, but we do know that she's married, and that's what's important, right? This is also doesn't get much better in the content being produced as well. This is an article from Sports Illustrated on Katie Ledecky, who is an Olympian swimmer. It mentioned multiple times that she's so strong and she's such a good swimmer that she's like a man, because women can't be good athletes just on their own. And this is also seen in advertisements that we're publishing alongside the articles and the content being produced. Like this ad for Bic: "Look like a girl, act like a lady, think like a man, work like a boss." This perpetuates the stereotype that women have to look and act a certain way, quote unquote ladylike, and that we're less intelligent than men, so thinking like one will help us advance in our careers. These are ads for a men's magazine called Shea Magazine. The first ad promotes grabbing women's genitals in order to receive her number. The second one literally makes a woman an object. She's a death calendar. And the third one jokes about killing women with the tagline, "If men are your target, make sure you don't miss them." Gloria Steinem, the co-founder of the Women's Media Center, once said, "When men or women turn to or on the media, yet fail to see women in our true diversity, there is a sense that all or some women literally don't count. It's crucial that the media report and reflect, not conceal and distort, especially when 50% of our country are as women, and yet they're not being represented as equally, and also in number-wise and also in how they are." In a study done by Paul Davies and his colleagues, men and women were asked to watch commercials and then take a test with math and English questions. This is going to show how do stereotypes in these ads really affect women, not only how the world views them, but how they view themselves. So women watched commercials that were bland and had no stereotypes, then took a test with math and English questions. And then some women watched commercials that did have the stereotypes that I've pointed out before, and then took the same test. And women who had the bland, neutral commercials slightly favored the math questions, but it was pretty even across the board. Whereas women who watched the stereotypical commercials and then took the test drastically favored the English questions, because they were internalizing the stereotype that women are less intelligent, and they avoided questions that would require more quote-unquote intelligence. And it's not only seen in on a temporary scale, but also on a more permanent scale as well. The study also found that stereotypes affect women's educational and vocational aspirations. Women exposed to stereotype commercials had less interest in both academic and professional jobs that are seen as traditionally masculine or male-dominated, because they were out of fear of being negatively stereotyped or experiencing sexism within those fields. Instead, they favored jobs in which they were immune to stereotypes. So for example, they would favor fashion or art because those are traditionally more quote-unquote feminine aspirations and jobs, but they were hesitant to favor math, science, or construction because those are male-dominated and traditionally masculine, and they risk experiencing sexism in those fields. So how can journalists like myself put an end to this misrepresentation and these harmful stereotypes that are being produced? First, we need to eliminate hiring biases. Clearly, there is a reason organizations aren't hiring women, and it isn't because women aren't as good at the job. If gender bias is this strong in the hiring process, we need to do blind interviews or start focusing more on the person's portfolio that's on their website or over their gender. We also need to utilize websites that provide women experts. SheSource even organizes them into current events, such as Terry Givens for interviews on the French election, or Lori Cox Hahn for interviews on President Trump's first 100 days. There are also other great websites like Power Sources Project and Women Also Know Stuff. If you're wondering if your article might have gender biases or are stereotyping women in a harmful way, you can always ask a woman editor or coworker to look over your articles. Our perspective and experience with this happening in our field is vital in making sure that it ends with this generation of writers. My experience as an editor, senior web editor for The Point, and an intern at Newsweek helped me realize how important it is for other people's perspectives before you publish an article. When I wrote an issue on LGBT issues I wrote an article on LGBT issues on Christian campuses for Newsweek, and I had my gay editor look over it before I published it to make sure I wasn't misrepresenting a people group that is already so harmfully stereotyped in the media today. They don't need it from me. They don't need any of that. So he looked over it and said it was fine, and I was able to publish it. And when I was editing an article for The Point on purity culture, I noticed that there were no male sources at all being used in the article, and my editor-in-chief and I jumped up and ran outside and found a male student, and we interviewed him on his thoughts on purity culture, because this goes both ways. It's not just, getting more women, it's making sure there is an equal amount of both men and women sources being utilized. And so that was a really important part to bring male readers into that article and see that purity culture and the problems within it do apply to them as well. And also, Tim, if you ever want to send me your articles, I have a contact form on my website, which I showed, and I always send me your articles. I'd love to be able to just utilize my viewpoint more to go over stereotypes and biases and make sure that I'm making sure that those aren't being published into the world and harming women. And for the readers in the room who aren't journalists, you guys have a lot more power than you realize. Without you, we don't have a career. So if you see something that's sexist and you don't like it, you can go to Women's Media Center's website. They have a form you can fill out that allows you to report sexist articles, and then Women's Media Center can handle it from there. Or you can take to social media. If you tag the company or brand or you start a hashtag, it's a very good chance they're going to see it and they're going to want to address your issue because it ruins their image and how much money they're going to make. Or they actually genuinely care, but that's usually not the case. So utilize your power. You have that. You have a voice. You have a social media. Utilize that. And it's especially important to encourage girls and women to pursue a career in journalism. Women might be scared to join the journalism field, as the studies by Davies and his colleagues showed, due to the fact that it is male-dominated. But it's important to encourage women to pursue their dreams and passions regardless of a gender bias that exists within that field, because that's the best way to deconstruct sexism in the industry, is to get women writing bylines and getting their voice out there. The writer in my shared cubicle at Newsweek was a man, my editor was a man, and my editor-in-chief was a man. But I deserved to be there because my writing went beyond what I was seen as a woman in that office, and I still earned respect because I wrote just as well as the other writers and interns. And I was able to write and speak on issues that I'm extremely passionate about, and I want women to have the opportunity as well without feeling like they're going to be misrepresented within those articles. That's it for my presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Let's open up now to any questions you might have.